Most Class 12 students struggle with how to actually understand financial management instead of just memorizing it for exams. I get it, because back when I was in school, I remember flipping through these thick business studies books and wondering, why can't someone just explain this in a way that actually makes sense? That's exactly what we're doing today. In this video, we're breaking down mastering financial management for Class 12, step by step, simple, and practical. By the end, you'll not only know how to score higher in exams, but also how to connect these concepts with real-life money decisions. Let's get started. Most students in Class 12 face the problem of simply memorizing the definition of financial management without ever grasping its real meaning or importance. The textbooks make it sound like a dry, theoretical subject filled with terms and phrases that feel disconnected from everyday life. Because of this, many students approach exams with stress and confusion, not understanding how the subject actually applies to business or even their personal future. The problem isn't that financial management is hard, but that it's rarely explained in a way that feels logical and practical. Students end up asking themselves, why do I need to know this? How is this relevant to me? This creates a gap between learning and application, and that gap leads to poor retention, low scores, and even worse, a lack of appreciation for how powerful financial management truly is. The solution starts with reframing the way we look at financial management. At its core, financial management is simply about making smart decisions with money. For a business, it's about how funds are raised, how they are used, and how to balance risk and return. For a student, understanding this is not just for passing exams, but for recognizing how companies around us survive, grow, and succeed. Once you start to think of financial management as the backbone of any business activity, it stops being a definition to memorize and becomes a principle you can actually relate to. To make it easier, instead of treating the subject like isolated chapters, students should see it as a process planning finances, allocating funds, using them wisely, and evaluating the results. That simple shift in mindset takes the fear out of the subject and gives it practical clarity. An effective solution also involves connecting the textbook definitions with real-world situations. For example, the textbook says financial management is about planning, organizing, directing, and controlling the financial activities of an enterprise. That can sound overwhelming on paper, but imagine you're running a small food stall. You need to decide how much money to invest in raw materials, whether to take a small loan to expand, and how much profit to keep aside for emergencies. Every one of those decisions is financial management in action. When students see this connection, suddenly the subject comes alive and makes sense because it mirrors real business life instead of staying trapped in academic jargon. Take a simple example. Imagine a student who gets pocket money every month. If they spend it all on fast food and entertainment without planning, by the end of the month they are broke. But if they set aside a portion for savings, a portion for needs, and a portion for wants, they are actually practicing the same principles of financial management that a business follows. The only difference is scale. A business manages crores of rupees, while a student manages a few thousand. But the logic is the same. By thinking of financial management this way, students begin to realize that the subject is not foreign or abstract. It's something they already do unconsciously. In business studies, understanding the importance of financial management also ties directly to exam performance. Many exam questions are not just about repeating definitions, but explaining their importance. So, if a student understands that financial management helps businesses in ensuring funds are available when needed, avoiding unnecessary costs, maintaining balance between risk and return, and achieving long-term growth, they can write more logical, high-scoring answers. Instead of giving vague statements, they can link importance to concepts like efficient utilization of funds, financial stability, and wealth maximization. That gives their answers more depth and earns higher marks. Another example is Apple as a company. Apple does not just create new products randomly. It plans carefully how much to invest in research and development, how to price its products, and how to distribute profits among shareholders. This is financial management at a global level. If Apple ignored financial management, even its most innovative products would not sustain the company's growth. By pointing this out in exams, a student can show not only their understanding, but also their ability to connect theory to practice, which teachers often reward with extra marks. So, the real problem with financial management is not its complexity, but the way it is introduced. The solution is to simplify, relate, and apply. When a student shifts their mindset from memorization to application, when they start thinking of financial management as decision-making about money, whether for a food stall, their pocket money, or a multinational company, suddenly the subject transforms from boring theory to a useful life skill that builds confidence for exams and beyond. One of the biggest problems students face when studying financial planning is that it often feels too abstract. The textbook definition says financial planning is about estimating how much money a business needs and deciding how to raise and use it. For many students, that definition becomes something they memorize the night before exams without ever grasping why it is so critical in the real world. Because of this, they often see financial planning as just another dry topic, forgetting that it's actually the first and most crucial step in running a successful business. Without planning, Businesses can make poor decisions, run out of money when they need it most, or borrow more than necessary and fall into debt. This lack of understanding creates a problem where students view financial planning as unimportant theory, when in reality it is the roadmap that ensures survival and growth. The solution to this problem begins with changing how we approach financial planning. Instead of thinking of it as a definition, think of it as a process of preparing for the future. For a business, financial planning ensures that funds are available when needed, that resources are used effectively, and that there is a balance between risk and safety. For students, this means learning to see financial planning as both a tool for businesses and a skill that applies in everyday life. A good financial plan prevents uncertainty, helps allocate money wisely, and ensures that goals are met without financial stress. When students understand that financial planning is essentially about making sure there is always enough money for the right needs at the right time, it stops being an abstract idea and starts becoming something practical and logical. To strengthen this solution, students can connect financial planning with examples from their own lives. Suppose you are preparing for your final board exams. If you don't plan your study schedule, you might spend too much time on one subject and leave too little time for another. The result is stress and lower marks. But if you plan your time properly, setting aside hours for each subject and leaving buffer time for revision, you're more likely to score well. Financial planning is the same, but with money instead of hours. A company without financial planning may spend too much on advertising and have no money left for production. But with proper planning, it can balance its funds between marketing, production, and salaries, ensuring smooth functioning. For a clearer example, imagine a small bakery business. If the bakery owner does not plan finances, they might run out of cash to buy raw materials in the middle of wedding season, when demand is highest. That missed opportunity could cost them big profits. On the other hand, if they had planned in advance by estimating expected demand, arranging funds for extra flour and sugar, and maybe even hiring additional staff, they could meet the demand and grow their customer base. This shows why financial planning is not just theoretical. It directly affects whether a business succeeds or fails. Another strong example can be seen in how large companies operate. Take a company like Tesla. To expand production of electric cars, Tesla cannot simply start building factories without a plan. It has to carefully estimate the billions needed, decide how much to raise from investors, and allocate funds between research, factory setup, labor, and marketing. If Tesla didn't plan properly, it could run out of money halfway through a project, leading to massive losses and damaged reputation. That's why financial planning is at the heart of every major decision a company makes, from launching a product to expanding into a new country. Even for students, financial planning plays a role in personal life. Imagine you get a scholarship of over $50,000 for your studies. Without a plan, you might spend half of it on gadgets or luxuries, and then find yourself short on funds for coaching fees or exam materials. But if you create a simple plan, allocating money for tuition, books, savings, and a small portion for entertainment, you will have peace of mind and financial stability. That is financial planning in its simplest form, and it shows how what you study in business studies applies directly to your life. So, while the problem with financial planning in textbooks is that it appears boring and theoretical, the solution is to treat it as a skill that helps avoid risks, manage funds, and prepare for the future. By connecting the concept with examples like running a bakery, managing pocket money, or studying how companies like Tesla expand, students can see financial planning as a roadmap that guides decisions and ensures smooth functioning, not just a phrase to memorize. One of the most common problems students face when learning about capital structure is that the concept feels heavy with technical terms like equity, debt, risk, and cost of capital. On paper, capital structure is defined as the mix of debt and equity a company uses to finance its operations. But the problem is that students often fail to see why this mix matters, or why a company cannot just rely entirely on one source of funds. The definitions start to sound repetitive, and without real understanding, students either memorize them blindly or get completely confused about how debt and equity actually work together. This results in poor exam answers and, more importantly, a missed opportunity to understand one of the most practical aspects of business finance. The challenge lies in seeing beyond the definition to understand the actual consequences of capital structure choices. The solution is to simplify the idea of capital structure and connect it with practical decision-making. At its core, capital structure is about balance. A business needs money to run, and it can get that money either by borrowing sovereign debt or by raising funds from owners and shareholders at equity. Too much debt can increase the burden of interest payments and risk of bankruptcy, while too much equity can reduce control and lower returns for the original owners. The right capital structure balances these two, so that the company can grow without becoming financially unstable. Once students view capital structure as a balancing act, the concept becomes far less intimidating and much more logical. Instead of memorizing, they can think of it as a simple question. Should the business borrow more money, raise more shares, or use a mix of both? To make it relatable, think about a student planning for college expenses. If they borrow too much through student loans, the interest burden after graduation will be overwhelming, even if it helps cover tuition immediately. On the other hand, if they depend only on their own savings or family's money, they might have to compromise on the quality of education or resources. The ideal situation is to use a mix, some personal funds and some loan, so that the financial pressure is manageable. That's exactly how businesses approach capital structure. They don't put all their eggs in one basket, they distribute risk and responsibility across debt and equity. For a concrete business example, take Reliance Industries. Reliance does not rely solely on issuing shares to raise money, because that would dilute ownership and reduce Mukesh Ambani's control over the company. At the same time, it cannot fund everything through debt because high borrowing would mean massive interest payments, which can drag profits down. Instead, Reliance uses a carefully planned mix of debt and equity, which helps it expand aggressively while still keeping financial risks under control. This is why the company has been able to grow into one of the largest conglomerates in India without collapsing under the weight of poor financing decisions. Another example is a startup company. Startups often begin with equity because they don't have the reputation or security to borrow large sums. Investors put money in exchange for ownership stakes. As the startup grows and gains stability, it may begin to use debt as well because debt does not dilute ownership. This gradual shift in capital structure shows how companies adapt their financing strategies depending on their stage of growth and market position. If a student connects this to what they learn in class, they can explain capital structure not just as a definition, but as a strategy that changes with circumstances. Even in a small business context, capital structure decisions are everywhere. Imagine a shopkeeper who wants to expand his store. He has two choices: borrow money from a bank or bring in a business partner who invests money in exchange for part ownership. If he takes only a loan, he risks not being able to pay back if sales don't grow quickly. If he brings in a partner, he loses some control over decisions. But if he uses a mix, taking a small loan and also bringing in a partner, he can reduce risk while still expanding his business. That's capital structure simplified. It's about choosing the right combination that balances cost, risk, and control. For students, the importance of capital structure in exams also cannot be overlooked. Questions often ask about the significance of choosing the right mix or the factors that influence capital structure. A student who understands that it's about balancing debt and equity can easily write strong answers, linking it to points like cost of funds, risk of bankruptcy, control of ownership, and long-term growth. Instead of giving vague statements, they can illustrate their answers with practical examples, making them stand out in exams. So the real problem with capital structure lies in treating it as just another definition filled with complicated words. The solution is to strip it down to its basic idea: how a company decides between borrowing money and raising ownership funds, and how the right mix ensures financial health. By applying this thinking to examples like Reliance, startups, or even a small shopkeeper, students can make the concept practical and memorable, showing that capital structure is not just theory but a real-world decision every business has to make. A common problem students face when studying fixed and working capital is that the terms sound technical and similar, making it difficult to distinguish between them. Many students memorize definitions like fixed capital refers to long-term funds, and working capital refers to short-term funds, without truly understanding the difference. This lack of clarity often leads to confusion in exams, especially when asked to explain with examples, and it also makes the subject feel disconnected from real-life business operations. The problem is that students view fixed and working capital as two isolated topics instead of seeing them as two sides of the same coin. As a result, they struggle to appreciate why businesses need both and how mismanagement of either can create serious issues. The solution begins with simplifying these terms. Fixed capital is the money a business invests in assets that will stay for the long run, like land, buildings, machinery, or technology. These are large, time investments that support production and operations for years. Working capital, on the other hand, is the money a business needs to run daily activities: buying raw materials, paying salaries, covering electricity bills, and managing short-term obligations. If fixed capital builds the foundation of the business, working capital keeps the engine running every single day. A business that only focuses on fixed capital may build a factory but fail to pay workers, while one that only manages working capital may cover daily expenses but never expand. Both are necessary, and understanding the difference is the first step in solving the problem of confusion. To make this clear, think of fixed and working capital like a car and its fuel. Buying the car itself is fixed capital. It's a long-term investment that will serve for many years. But the car won't run without fuel, which represents working capital. You cannot ignore one for the other. Having the best car without fuel is useless, just as having fuel without a car makes no sense. Businesses operate in the same way, where fixed capital allows long-term production and working capital ensures day-to-day operations flow smoothly. Once students connect the concept to this simple analogy, the confusion starts to disappear and the terms become much easier to remember. A real-life example is seen in large manufacturing companies like Tata Steel. The company invests heavily in fixed capital by building plants, purchasing machinery, and setting up production facilities. These investments last for decades and allow the company to operate on a massive scale. However, alongside these fixed assets, Tata Steel also requires significant working capital to purchase raw materials like iron ore and coal, pay wages to thousands of employees, and cover operational expenses. If Tata Steel failed to maintain enough working capital, even with the best machinery in the world, production would halt. This shows that fixed and working capital are not separate choices, but complementary requirements for running a business successfully. On a smaller scale, consider a shopkeeper who opens a new grocery store. Buying shelves, refrigerators, and renting the shop space is fixed capital. These investments are long-term and will not be replaced often. But the shopkeeper also needs working capital every day to buy stock, pay electricity bills, and manage customer demands. If he spends all his money on fixed capital, say, buying expensive furniture and a big freezer, but has no funds left to purchase goods for resale, the shop cannot function. On the other hand, if he only has working capital and no fixed investment, he may be selling items from a rented corner with no infrastructure, limiting his growth. The balance between fixed and working capital determines whether the business thrives or struggles. Another strong example is in startups. Many startups initially raise funds to buy computers, office furniture, and rent co-working spaces. This is their fixed capital. But when they scale up, what becomes more important is working capital because they need cash to pay salaries, run marketing campaigns, and handle recurring bills. A startup with high fixed capital but poor working capital often collapses because it cannot sustain daily operations. This is why investors often look at not just how much a company has invested in assets, but also how well it manages its working capital cycle. For students preparing for exams, recognizing the importance of both types of capital can make their answers more impactful. Instead of simply writing, fixed capital is for long-term needs and working capital is for short-term needs, they can explain how the two interact using relatable analogies and examples. This makes their answers stand out as practical and well understood rather than just memorized. By showing that fixed capital provides the structure for operations while working capital fuels everyday functioning, students can demonstrate a deeper level of understanding. So the real problem is that fixed and working capital are often taught as rigid definitions that students struggle to apply. The solution is to view them as complementary tools that businesses need simultaneously, one for building and one for running. By using simple analogies like cars and fuel, and examples ranging from small shopkeepers to giants like Tata Steel, the subject becomes easier to grasp and far more relevant to both exams and real-world business situations. A major problem students encounter when studying financial decisions is that the topic appears broad and filled with categories: investment decisions, financing decisions, and dividend decisions, each carrying its own meaning and significance. At first glance, students often feel overwhelmed by the jargon and struggle to remember which decision relates to which aspect of finance. This confusion leads to weak exam answers where they mix up the terms or fail to provide proper examples. Another issue is that students treat these decisions as if they are purely theoretical, without realizing that these are the exact decisions every business makes daily. Because of this, the importance of financial decisions gets lost in memorization rather than true understanding, making students unprepared to connect the topic with real-life applications. The solution is to simplify financial decisions by breaking them down into 3 straightforward categories and showing how each directly affects the success of a business. Investment decisions are simply about where to put money so that it generates returns in the future. Financing decisions are about where the money will come from, whether through equity, debt, or a mix of both. Dividend decisions are about how profits will be distributed should they be reinvested in the business or given out to shareholders. When students understand these 3 in plain terms, the entire concept becomes easy to remember. Instead of treating them as separate, confusing theories, they can think of them as 3 interconnected steps in managing money: deciding where to put money, deciding where to get money from, and deciding what to do with profits. To make this relatable, think of it from a student's perspective. Suppose a student wins a scholarship or receives pocket money. The investment decision would be how they choose to use that money, maybe saving it in a fixed deposit or investing in books that could help them in exams. The financing decision would be how they manage funds if they want something expensive, like a laptop. Should they ask family for support, take a small loan, or use their savings? The dividend decision would be what they do when they earn something extra, maybe through part-time work. Do they spend it on themselves immediately, or do they save it to build something for the future? By linking the concept to these simple daily life decisions, students can grasp the essence of financial decisions without getting lost in definitions. A strong example in the business world is seen with companies like Infosys. When Infosys earns profits, the management has to decide how much of it should be given back to shareholders as dividends and how much should be reinvested in technology and expansion. That's the dividend decision. At the same time, Infosys also makes investment decisions about whether to put money into new training centers, software development, or global expansion projects. And when funding these expansions, it makes financing decisions about whether to raise money by issuing new shares, taking loans, or using retained earnings. These 3 decisions, though separate in definition, are deeply connected in practice. If Infosys makes a poor investment decision, even the best financing structure will not save it. If it makes poor financing choices, like taking too much debt, its profits will shrink due to high interest payments. And if it mishandles dividend decisions, shareholders may lose trust in the company. Another real-world example is Tesla. Tesla constantly faces investment decisions about building new factories, creating advanced technology, and innovating in electric vehicles. To finance these massive projects, it must make financing decisions about whether to borrow money, issue shares, or reinvest profits. Finally, Tesla's dividend decision is unique. It usually reinvests profits instead of paying them out as dividends because it prioritizes growth over immediate returns to shareholders. This shows how different companies can make different choices depending on their strategy, and it proves that financial decisions are not just textbook topics, but real strategies that shape global companies. Even in smaller businesses, the same principles apply. Take a small clothing boutique. The owner must make investment decisions such as buying sewing machines or renting a bigger shop. Financing decisions involve whether to take a loan from the bank, borrow from family, or bring in a partner. Dividend decisions happen when profits are earned. Should the owner reinvest in buying more stock or take the money home as personal income? Every business, regardless of size, makes these three types of decisions regularly, and their success or failure depends on the quality of those choices. For students, the importance in exams lies in showing that they understand both the definition and the real-world application. Instead of simply writing, financial decisions include investment, financing, and dividend decisions. They can explain how these decisions are interconnected, how they affect the growth and stability of a business, and give an example like Infosys or a small boutique. This adds depth to their answers and earns higher marks. By approaching the topic this way, financial decisions stop being three memorized headings and become three practical steps that every business must take, whether it is a startup, a global company, or even an individual managing personal money. A common problem students face when studying the factors affecting financial decisions is that the list of factors appears long, technical, and overwhelming. Textbooks often mention things like cost of funds, risk, cash flow, control, and market conditions, but for many students, these remain just words on a page without much meaning. They struggle to understand how these factors actually influence the choices a company makes in real life. Because of this, answers in exams often become mechanical lists instead of well-explained arguments, and students miss the opportunity to show deeper understanding. The bigger issue is that without connecting these factors to practical situations, students fail to see how businesses actually weigh these elements before making financial choices. It feels abstract instead of practical, and this lack of clarity is what holds many students back from mastering the topic. The solution lies in simplifying the factors and showing how they directly impact decision-making. The cost of funds, for example, simply means how expensive it is to raise money. If borrowing from a bank requires high interest, a company may prefer equity. If issuing shares dilutes control too much, they might prefer loans. Risk refers to the level of uncertainty. Companies with stable earnings may take on more debt, while riskier businesses prefer equity to avoid fixed interest obligations. Cash flow is another straightforward factor. If a company has strong cash inflows, it can afford debt repayments, but if its cash flow is weak, it may avoid borrowing. Control is important too, because raising money through equity means sharing ownership and decision-making. Then there are market conditions, which often dictate whether investors are willing to put money into a company or whether banks are lending easily. Once students understand that each factor is simply about balancing cost, risk, and control, the topic becomes much clearer and less intimidating. To make this relatable, think of a student planning to buy a laptop. The cost of funds comes in when deciding whether to buy it with savings or on installments. If installments carry high interest, savings might be the better option. Risk plays a role too. What if the student's allowance is irregular, making it risky to commit to monthly payments? Cash flow matters as well. If the student has regular income from tutoring, monthly payments may not be a problem. Control can also be compared to involving parents in the purchase. If parents provide the money, they may influence the choice of laptop. And market conditions reflect the availability of discounts or financing options at the time. By relating each factor to a simple decision like buying a laptop, students can see how businesses face the same dilemmas on a larger scale. In the business world, a strong example is seen in companies like Amazon. When Amazon decides to expand globally, it must consider the cost of funds. Borrowing billions at high interest would be risky, so it often prefers reinvesting profits. Risk is also a major factor, since Amazon operates in a competitive market. Too much debt could create financial stress during downturns. Its strong cash flow allows it to handle financing decisions more flexibly, giving it options that other companies may not have. Control is important too. Jeff Bezos initially avoided excessive equity dilution to maintain strategic power. And finally, market conditions influence when Amazon issues bonds or raises funds, as favorable conditions allow it to borrow cheaply. This shows how every factor mentioned in textbooks is not just theory, but a real element that shapes decisions at the highest corporate levels. Another example can be taken from a small-scale business. Imagine a local bakery looking to expand. The cost of funds matters because a bank loan at high interest could eat into profits. Risk must be considered too. If sales are seasonal, relying on fixed loan repayments may be dangerous. Cash flow plays a big role. If the bakery has steady income, taking a loan becomes less risky. Control comes in if the bakery considers bringing in an investor who wants part ownership. The owner must decide if they are willing to share authority. Market conditions also influence the decision. If the economy is booming, expansion might be safer, but in a recession, it may be better to wait. By applying each factor in this simple context, students can see how businesses, big or small, evaluate decisions practically. For exams, students who move beyond listing factors and instead explain them with logic and examples stand out. Instead of writing cost of funds, risk, cash flow, control, and market conditions, they can write that the cost of funds determines whether loans or equity are cheaper. Risk dictates the safety of borrowing, cash flow ensures repayment ability, control influences ownership decisions, and market conditions shape timing. Adding examples like Amazon or a bakery shows a deeper level of understanding. By doing this, students turn what looks like a memorization, heavy chapter into a clear, practical framework, making it easier to remember and apply effectively. Financial management isn't just theory, it's the foundation of how businesses survive and grow. We began with the meaning and importance of financial management, understanding it as the backbone of decision making. Then we looked at financial planning, which acts like a roadmap for the future. Capital structure showed us how balancing debt and equity determines long-term stability. Fixed and working capital explained how businesses need both long-term investments and short-term funds to function smoothly. We also broke down financial decisions into investment, financing, and dividend choices, showing how they shape growth. Finally, we saw how factors like cost, risk, cash flow, and control influence every financial decision a business makes. Together, these points give you a clear, practical view of financial management, both for your Class 12 exams and for real-world money management. If you found this helpful, don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop a comment sharing which concept clicked for you the most. And in the next video, we'll dive into how business environment shapes financial decisions Class 12 guide. You won't want to miss it.